In 1904, a German general put an order to exterminate an entire people in writing, and signed his own name to it. That document did not disappear. It is sitting in a German military archive right now. And in 2021, Germany finally admitted what it says, while carefully making sure that admission couldn't cost them a single euro they didn't choose to pay. His name was Lothar von Trotha. This is not a story about what he might have meant, or how his words might have been softened by history. This is the actual text of the order he issued, translated directly from the archive where it still exists today. The Herero are no longer German subjects, it read. The Herero nation must now leave the country. If the people refuse to do so, I shall compel them with the cannon. Within the German borders, every Herero, with or without a gun, with or without cattle, will be shot. I will no longer accept women and children. I will drive them back to their people, or let them be shot at. He signed it, the great general of the mighty emperor. This is the story of the Herero and Nama genocide, and it does not need embellishment. The documents alone are enough.
The Herero were cattle-herding pastoralists who had lived across what is now central Namibia for generations, building their wealth and social structure around their herds. The Nama, a Khoi pastoralist people, occupied the drier lands to the south. Both were established, self-governing societies decades before Germany claimed the territory as a colony in 1884.
Lothar von Trotha was not a new arrival to colonial violence. He was a career Prussian officer who had already commanded brutal suppression campaigns in German East Africa before the Kaiser sent him to crush a Herero uprising that had begun months earlier, in January 1904, after decades of land seizure, forced labor, and broken treaties pushed the Herero people to revolt. At the Battle of Waterberg, on August 11, 1904, German forces defeated the main Herero force. And instead of accepting their surrender, von Trotha drove the survivors, thousands of men, women, and children, into the Omaheke, a stretch of desert with no reliable water for hundreds of miles. Then he did something specific and deliberate. He ordered the wells poisoned. He built a guard line roughly 150 miles long to seal off any path back. The order he issued weeks later, on October 2nd, made explicit what his soldiers had already begun doing in the field. Thousands died of thirst in that desert. Historians estimate as many as 65,000 to 80,000 Herero people were killed in total, close to 80% of the entire Herero population. Even by the standards of the German colonial government, the order went too far to be allowed to stand as written. Under pressure from his own chancellor, Kaiser Wilhelm II had it formally rescinded in December 1904. Not out of mercy, but because an open policy of extermination created a diplomatic problem. What replaced it was not better. It was concentration camps. In April 1905, von Trotha issued a second order, this one aimed at the Nama people, who had risen up under leaders including Hendrik Witbooi and Jacob Morenga. The bounty language was the same as before. A price on the head of each leader, and a warning that resistance would end the same way it had for the Herero. Roughly 10,000 Nama people were killed, about half of their entire population. Of the camps the German colonial government built, one has its own name in the historical record, Shark Island, off the coast of Lüderitz. It was not built to house prisoners, it was built to work them to death. Inmates, mostly Nama, alongside surrendered Herero families, were forced into hard labor building the port and rail infrastructure of the colony that had just tried to exterminate them, on a barren, wind-scoured peninsula with almost no shelter from the freezing South Atlantic conditions. Rations were minimal and often raw. Disease spread unchecked. Of the roughly 3,500 to 4,000 people held there, historians estimate that somewhere between 65 and 80% did not survive. German physicians used the dead for research. Human remains from the camp were catalogued and sent to institutions in Germany for study under the racial pseudoscience of the era, the same body of theory that would go on to shape eugenics research for decades afterward. This is not a detail historians discovered later. It happened openly, as official colonial policy, and the paper trail survives. For most of the 20th century, Germany said nothing official about any of this. A first ministerial apology came in 2004, 100 years after the extermination order. Formal acknowledgement that the killings amounted to genocide didn't come until 2015. And in May 2021, Germany's government finally issued what it called formal recognition. Here is exactly what it said. The German government acknowledges that the abominable atrocities committed during periods of the colonial war culminated in events that, from today's perspective, would be called genocide.
Read that sentence again.
It uses the word genocide. It also does everything possible to make sure that word carries no legal weight. Germany's own foreign minister stated explicitly that no legal claims or compensation could be derived from the admission. The 1.1 billion euros attached to it, spread across 30 years, was labeled a development grant, not reparations. That word was deliberately avoided. Herero and Nama traditional leaders rejected the deal almost immediately. The Ova Herero Traditional Authority and the Nama Traditional Leaders Association called it a public relations exercise. They pointed out that they had been excluded from the negotiations entirely. This was a deal between the German and Namibian governments, not with the descendants of the people it claimed to address. It said nothing about the land, much of which remains in the hands of commercial farmers of German descent to this day. Leaders organized protests. They took the agreement to court. Look again at that sentence Germany's government wrote in 2021. It doesn't dodge the word genocide. It uses it, and then builds a wall of qualifiers around it precise enough that the word costs nothing.
From today's perspective, would be called genocide.
Not was. Not we are legally responsible for. A sentence engineered, clause by clause, so that admitting the truth and paying for the truth never have to happen in the same document. That is not a translation problem.
That is a template.
Once you know how to read it, you will see the same construction again, in other countries, about other atrocities, admitting just enough to end the headlines without ever opening the checkbook. The Herero and Nama leaders who rejected this deal weren't rejecting an apology. They read the sentence exactly as carefully as you just did, and they said so, publicly, in court. That is the part of this story still being written.